Anyway, still to come today, Mike Ward will be joining us to give us his pick of the week's telly. We're back in Brazil to speak to Tim Vickery. Rubinho scoring audaciously, I think you can call it, on his first game for Santos.
You mentioned.
And Pele's son, 13-year-old son, has signed for Santos. He's obviously got to be pretty good.
He's a clocking centre half.
You can't imagine it, can you?
Yeah.
His name's Joshua, so we'll find out a little bit more about him later on.
He puts it in rosette. That's his priority.
Well, his other son, was it Adinho, was a goalkeeper, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So I suppose you're going to try and be as little like your dad, so you're not compared to him as possible.
He's quite a lot younger, so maybe he's more, he could be more like...
Bit of a ball player.
Yeah.
Look, we'll find out later on. Before that, we're going to talk boxing. And in a different era, Tommy Hearns, the original hitman, could have dominated one, if not two, divisions. But he found himself fighting in an era where there were people like Marvin Hagler, who he lost to, and indeed Sugar Ray Leonard, who he lost to. But joining us now to try and set the record straight and put him in some kind of a historical context, as he does become a bit of the forgotten man of that era, is the co-author of a new book, Hitman, the Thas Hearns Story, Damian Hughes. Good afternoon, Damian.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Damian. We had George Foreman in once, and we were chatting to George, and we said, does it ever bother you that your career is defined by a fight that you lost? And he said, yes, it does. He was brutally honest, and I'm sure Tommy Hearns must feel... and it's kind of quite similar, really, having lost those two career-defining fights, if you like, against Hagler and Leonard.
Yeah, exactly. He's an interesting fella, just the whole context of where he comes from. I mean, he came from Detroit in the area, when he came from the famous Kronk gym that produced a whole stream of champions, where, again, he was just one of a number of names there. And then he went into world level, where he was fighting against the likes of Duran, Leonard, and Hagler, where again and like you say, he always came up slightly short.
I mean, in good fights, sort of explosive fights. Certainly, I mean they were brutal fights. Right? The Hagler fight was pretty brutal.
Well, the Ring magazine still calls out the most brutal 8 minutes that's ever taken place in a ring.
You describe it in the book as the most exciting sort of 3 rounds of boxing ever, and that would be hard to dispute. That it was incredible, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was just like hell unleashed, wasn't it? I mean, my favourite bit of that was when Richard Steele, the referee, called the fight to a halt at one stage because of the big gash on Hagler's head, and he was debating whether he was going to stop the fight or not. And he said to Hagler, "Can you still see?" And Hagler said, "Well, I'm not missing him yet, am I?"
For our younger listeners who didn't see Hearns fight, Damian, what would you say? Who's the kind of similar fighter? Is there anybody you could compare him to who's fighting now?
I think he was pretty unique, to be honest. I think he was like incredibly tall for his weight, and he just had an incredible reach. Where his speed was phenomenal. And he was able to punch as well as to box, if you like. And I'd say he was pretty unique. And I think what you said in the introduction, that he's the sort of guy that if he was fighting today, I think he'd be one of the superstars of the sport. We'll be talking about him in the same breath that we talk about the likes of Floyd Mayweather.
There's a photo of him in the book sitting slumped on his stool, aged 47, and it's that tragic thing, isn't it, where we see it all the time with boxers, the great ones. They never know when to pack it in, do they?
Well, that was one of the things. I mean, we approached him about working with him and looking at doing an autobiography, because my dad that I wrote the book with knew him from when he was a schoolboy, because he went out and worked with Emmanuel Stewart at the Kronk gym. And we approached him because we had that sort of relationship with him. And whilst he gave us permission to go ahead and do the book, he actually said, I don't want to do an autobiography because the story's not over yet. And he's still claiming that he's still looking for a comeback. He still wants to win another world title.
That's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, which, like you say, it's sad, isn't it, that you see him at this age still looking to fight on.
The one plus against the greats is beating Duran. He beat Roberto Duran, we should remember as well, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, that was a brilliant fight. And like the hostility that Duran brought to the proceedings for that, again, made it a really fascinating story in terms of, it relates to the stuff like Hagler and Leonard and him all seem to have this, they were all characters. So the whole build-up to the fight and everything was, it was colourful. It got people engaged, even if they weren't boxing fans. And Duran was another example of it.
Yeah. I mean, he fought over here. Did he fight Dennis Andrews over here, or was that in the States?
No, Dennis went over to the States to fight him. So that was when he went up to cruiserweight and beat Dennis for that there. Right. But yeah, Dennis did really well in that fight, gave a real good account of himself.
I think it was just saying he did fight over here just towards the end of his career, didn't he? When he was kind of past his best, I'm fairly certain. He managed, he thought Nate Miller, didn't he, towards the end?
Yeah, that's right. We were there at that at the it was at the MEN Arena, and yeah, it was sad. I mean, because it was packed. Like people went to witness him, you know, to go and see a great. But it was one of those fairly poignant moments where he won, but you know, it wasn't Thomas Hearns in there. It was a shadow of him fighting.
His son fights now, doesn't he, Ronald?
Yeah, he's recently been beaten in a couple of fights, but he's supposed to be fairly decent, you know. But apparently he's distanced himself from Thomas in terms of, you know, I heard you talking about Pele's son, and I think it's the same thing there, where I don't think he wanted to be measured against his dad's achievement. So I think he's a good, solid pro rather than turning up any trees.
Away from the ring, he had a fairly colourful life. I mean, he's had some problems in later years, and quite a colourful family as well. A bit of a tragic story behind them, haven't they?
Yeah, there was a story. I mean, I work as a sports psychologist, so I find like the whole preparation of fighters fascinating. And there was one story when he was due to fight Leonard for the second time in 1989. The day before the fight, so on the day of the weigh-in, he was playing cards with his entourage when somebody came in and told him that his brother had shot his girlfriend dead in Thomas Hearns' own bedroom. And he said that, like, the reports and people that we interviewed that were there at the time just said, like, he merely just looked up, you know, listened to what they had to say, and then got back to playing his hand of cards again. Like, just didn't let it bother him while he was in the process of fighting. And then afterwards, when the trial went on, his brother got a life sentence. So yeah, and then in his later career, Tommy was in trouble as well for attacking his own son just towards the end of his days as well. So yeah, he's led a colourful life, and we've tried to capture that in the book. You know, tell some of the story about who he was as a person, but try and capture a bit of the context of the era that he was fighting in as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was a golden era for, you know, middleweights and welterweights, wasn't it? I mean, it was just, they come along every so often. That was the glamour weight, wasn't it, really, at that time?
Well, there's so many boxers now that, you know, talk about it as that was where they grew up watching those great fights, and then they recall them in terms of that was their inspiration for starting. And I think we had it with the heavyweights in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And like you say, it's cyclical. It'll come again.
And you mentioned the Kronk Gym there and the Manny Stewart, and it's gone, isn't it? They're trying to go back to the old site if they can.
Yeah, it's closed down. Which, I mean, there was a big campaign a couple of years ago to try and keep it open, which unfortunately failed. But in terms of the production line that they came from and that they just kept churning out, you know, the phenomenal number of champions. Also, as well, one of the things that we discovered when we started looking at who'd come through it was the amount of the champions that subsequently went on to either be killed or came to some fairly ignominious endings as well.
Well, best of luck with the book. Good to talk to you, Damian.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thanks.
Hitman, the Thas Hearns Story, Brian and Damian Hughes, is available there. Interesting.